Is Bitcoin forming a head and shoulders formation right over here? We have the left shoulder, we have the head, we have the right shoulder developing at some point in the future down the line. We also have the neckline right over here at the base of the left shoulder, residing at the 22K region. Losing this neckline would validate this head and shoulders, and in today's episode we're going to be talking about what to expect after we see a breakdown from this head and shoulders for Bitcoin. So subscribe to the channel and let's dive right into today's episode. With any head and shoulders, we always have to look at the structural elements, the left, right shoulder, the head, the neckline that validates this structure, but we also have to look at the volume profile. We have to see a declining volume profile over time, with the left shoulder seeing the most buy side interest and this buy side interest slowly declining over time, which we're seeing here. And this buy side interest has to be smallest at the very apex of what is essentially a descending triangle on volume. We have to see little volume generally speaking, but also little buy side volume in the right shoulder right over here. And once we form that right shoulder, once we see a loss of the neckline to break down this head and shoulders formation, we'll probably see a breakout on seller volume to confirm the breakdown from the head and shoulders. And we tend to see a lot of symmetricality also in the head and shoulders. We see a 56-day left shoulder here. But what's interesting about the symmetricality of the head right over here is that we see a 91-day formation right over here, which is going to be almost equal to the second part. And that's part of why we have this double top formation at the moment. And double tops tend to be quite symmetrical. 91 days right over here is the second half, the first half of the double top. And in a week's time, we're going to see this second half be pretty much identical, symmetrical, and we tend to see double tops be quite symmetrical. So in 1 week's time, we're going to see this double top be perfectly symmetrical. And if we lose 26K, this double top is going to validate. And that's where we're going to see this head and shoulders really start to take place. So if we see this double top be 91 days here and then 91 days here, so 180 days long, losing 26K, and we're going to start seeing the beginning of the right shoulder formation. And if we see the right shoulder take place over 56 days, just like we saw with 56 days in the left shoulder taking place, then we're going to see this head and shoulders formation conclude and fully complete by the first week of November. And this is when we'd start to look for a breakdown moment from the neckline. So how should we think about this head and shoulders formation in terms of trying to come up with a target? So measuring from the very top of the head to the neckline and just propagating this in this manner. And the measured move for breakdown from this head and shoulders would be 15,500, which seems totally ludicrous at this point in time. It would essentially give us a double bottom on this bear market bottom, which seems so far out at this point in time. But according to this head and shoulders, which could be forming, we're not really seeing this formation take place just yet, but we are seeing initial signs. And if we see a breakdown from here, then we'll probably see a measured move take place to 15,500 according to this technical structure. And it's really important to note how we're seeing a double top here in the structural formation of the head and shoulders. We have an inverse head and shoulders earlier play out, which gave us this double top anyway. And now we might be seeing this head and shoulders develop as well. So just to understand the price points that we really need to be focusing on in terms of this head and shoulders really playing out, number one, this 26K region, that's the base of this double top that we're forming in this head. So it's interesting to see how a double top can constitute the head of a much larger formation. So 26K, losing 26K would see us break down into the right shoulder formation. And the top of this left shoulder right over here, it happens to also be the top, or at least the neckline of this inverse head and shoulders that we saw break out earlier this year. But this top of the left shoulder and the neckline of that inverse head and shoulder, that's also actually going to be the top of the right shoulder. So around 25k is where we see the top of that right shoulder take place. So essentially we're seeing symmetricality, left shoulder top and right shoulder top, essentially speaking. And a 25k rejection would get us into 22k for this neckline to continue to hold. This is where we're going to get a decision on this head and shoulders potentially forming. You can see right over here, this left shoulder, downside wicks, even right over here, downside wicks below the neckline. We could see a lot of volatility go into 20k, for instance. Lots of volatility before slinking back up, performing a weekly candle close, just like over here, above the right shoulder region. That's a possibility if we indeed see a breakdown from 26k, 25k flipping into resistance and then rejecting price into 22k. That's something that we could potentially see before this neckline is tested. And if we actually get a weekly close below the neckline, then we'd have to start thinking about a measured move for the head and shoulders potentially taking place. So you might be asking yourself, how does this head and shoulders tie in with this macro range that we're seeing on Bitcoin from 3,600, where we saw a range high rejection from this range high resistance, to the range low support of 16k? How does the head and shoulders actually, tie in with this? Because we have a higher low support right over here. We have a lower high resistance right over here. We have the inverse head and shoulders support, so that's the neckline of this inverse head and shoulders, and we also have the neckline of the head and shoulders that we might be seeing develop here, right? With this left shoulder, the head here, and the right shoulder forming. So this is what we come up with, this left shoulder, which is essentially the support for the left shoulder and the resistance for the left shoulder, and in the same way for the right shoulder as well. The support for the right shoulder and the right range high resistance for the right shoulder. So essentially, this left shoulder and this right shoulder are going to be ranging between 22k to 25k. So really important to note that this left shoulder, head, and right shoulder, we see really important structural elements here. And if we were to see a downside wick from below the neckline, so a fake breakdown from the head and shoulders, we'd see potentially a downside wick, maybe shorter, maybe longer, but a downside wick into this higher low. And that's what this support is coming into, essentially, that if we were to see a fake breakdown from the head and shoulders just to fake everyone out, it would tap this higher low and maybe even go a little bit lower. So it really depends on this downside wick. But generally speaking, I don't think that this head and shoulders would play out in the sense that we see a measured move go into 16k. I don't think that's as likely as this scenario that, okay, maybe we could break down from here. Whether we downside wick, fine. But if we do break down from here, I feel like we either just see some downside volatility below this higher low right over here, this higher low support, to just support price from breaking down completely into the lower ranges, the lower area and the range. So sub 20k, essentially speaking. That's something that I feel is more likely than Bitcoin going for a double bottom. And this head and shoulders all starts off with 26k losing itself as a support. And this is something we spoke about in terms of this current price action developing a 2021 fractal from the previous bull market. And at the moment, we have seen a rejection. So the whole idea was for a potential lower high to develop over here, just like in 2021. And we're seeing a rejection, an upside wick, with 26k potentially being lost already. It's early on the week, so we'll still see. But at the moment, losing 26k would validate this fractal. And so far, so good. So if you want to learn more about this bearish fractal, feel free to check out this video in the top right hand corner, and I'll speak to you in that one. Speak to you soon.